Well, greetings, world, and greetings, Seven Spot. I bet you didn't expect to hear this voice or see this face. So, Dave Lassell here. Mike and I are going to be hosting a show today about getting your somebody else's project on the road. Is it possible? Is it reasonable? Do you really want to dig into all this stuff? So we're going to just jump right in. We got a bunch of topics to cover, mostly from questions that people have had in other streams. We've also got with us Martin Coghill, who has completed a 7 and is working on an electric 7 that we'll probably talk about some other time as well. And we have Patrick Quinlan from Premier Wiring Systems, who has now famously rewired the original Ron Champion Locost #1, as well as many other projects he's been involved in. So the first thing we're going to talk about, I think, today is what do you want to do? Do you have a project in mind? Have you found one that someone else has given up on? And do you want to dig into it? And what do you want to use it for? So when we say what do you want to use it for, we're thinking, do you want to put it on the road? Do you want to take it to the track? Or do you want to do both? So for me, my car, I purchased a chassis from a guy locally here. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, and I found another car in Tennessee that was started and very unfinished. It had not. It was started. That's when it came to my house. Thank you, Jim, for posting. And it had a bunch of things that I didn't want, but the frame was already pretty much done, and now I've cut the frame into a million pieces because that's what happens when you decide to change components. So if this is part of what you think you're going to do, you either need to be ready to be frustrated or have skills already in place or be ready to learn as you go along. So I've swapped out a perfectly good Ford 8.8 rear end from a, I think, 98 Mustang for all Miata rear subframe and parts. I will not be using the stock shocks, but I have a solution for that. And as you can see, it was a perfectly good rolling chassis when I got it.
And moving,
And now it doesn't look like that at all. It's on the benches I built. And it's totally fine. We can just flip through things. So this is mostly the current state of what mine looks like sitting here in my very messy garage. But since mine's going to be mostly on the road, I decided to use other road car components. So yeah, and we'll put some of these questions. So this was a McSorley 442, I believe. I've been rereading the 7S website just to make what I think it is, and obviously, so I'm going to be using Miata front and rear subframe. It looks a little bit weird, but it's already so much wider that the body work was going to look strange anyway. And hopefully, I will end up with some sort of suspension configuration in the front that looks like this, and we will see. Obviously, Mike's is a bit different, and anybody can feel free to jump in and interrupt me at any point. But that's where mine is, and we're going to talk a little more. Mine obviously is going to be mostly a road car, and if I take it to the track, I got to drive it there anyway. So it's going to be on the road at some point. And I'll put a couple of these. So the 442 chassis, as I remember it from the 7S website, is 4 inches wider throughout, 4 inches longer, and 2 inches higher to accommodate more modern engines because we don't have a lot of 1300 crossflows, which I believe is Mike has a 1600 crossflow in his now.
That's correct.
And that engine was like 23 inches high, and I'm using a K24, which is about 25 inches high, which is almost the whole height of some people's cars from the ground, and mine's got to have some sort of ground clearance. I believe, Martin, you have one with a Miata 1.8 from a 91.
That's right, and it's the Haynes Roadster outer chassis frame.
So that's like an S3, I believe, dimensions. And yeah, I guess we'll just jump right to Martin since I went with you first. So Martin took apart you can go ahead because I don't know anything about your build.
So I think Jim has grabbed some photographs from the Locost USA website. So yeah, I started with this 94 Miata. I believe I paid $1,800 for it. Sorry, there's a lot of background noise there.
I got you.
Yeah, thank you. And then, yeah, I stripped it down. I stripped everything possible from it. I guess you can see some of the plumbing and the wiring here. And yeah, I actually used the entire wiring loom for about a year in the car. I actually created a box underneath the scuttle, which was down at the front of the passenger footwell to ram all the extra cables. I was so scared of not shortening the wiring loom properly, and didn't know that there was possibly a commercially available source from Patick. It would have saved me a lot of cut knuckles and all the rest of it, and a few choice words. But I don't know if yet, Jim, do you have any other pictures? Yeah, there's the 1.8 Miata motor. It still looks like that today. I've done nothing with it, but it runs great. That's what that was put on what was left from the car. So I basically sold all the bits that I took off that I didn't need to use, and ended up $300 out of pocket. So I made like $1,500 selling things very cheaply on eBay. And yeah, so like you get kids coming up and taking the wing mirrors, dashboard, all sorts of stuff. And just like you, Dave, I used the entire rear subframe. I just didn't have the experience at this point in time of even handling a welder. So I mean, I learned on this project. So I just wanted the security of that entire rear being a one-piece thing. And yeah, just traditional stuff. I actually use sawhorses with carpeting to keep those legs rigid. I mean, this really was doing it on the cheap. I'm not sure how many pictures, Jim, you can probably flick through them pretty quickly. Everybody's got photos like these, but so yeah, the outside chassis shape and all the rails is per the Haynes Roadster. And then I kind of just went bespoke with the transmission tunnel and the kind of cockpit area, everything on the interior. Those aluminum panels are pre-painted trailer panels. They came white, and they were really easy to handle and to shape by hand. And you could probably see just in front of the computer there, that is where the box is that goes down in the passenger compartment area that just has all the extra wiring loom shoved in there. And I ran it like that for about a year before shortening the wiring loom. Yeah, so this is like a 14 month long project, working pretty hard actually, probably 10-hour shifts each Saturday and Sunday for 14 months.
That should give some people a good impression of like a timeline. If we'll talk about that in just a moment. But Mike, do you want to talk about what you are dealing with and the project that you found? And we'll get to money and timeline and then things that we need to get started in just a minute. So maybe Jim's got a slideshow for Mike's build as well.
Yeah, so that was already in a later state. I basically bought the chassis without the rear end. It came cheap. The previous owner wanted to install a Mazda rotary engine together with what I found out possibly a Mazda or kind of Ford differential, not a live rear axle, but the chassis design originally was designed for what was the Ron Champion one. So I just completed to the Ron Champion book. At the moment, I'm almost there with the rear end. Still have to do some bits and bobs. Yeah, you will have, as mentioned before, you will have lots of surprises which you didn't even thought about it. Yeah, well, I have to move some of the chassis rails, yes, particularly to make space for the differential, accommodate that. What I found out now with just this weekend, basically, I thought I finished the upper, whatever you call it, upper frame. That doesn't line up with the bodywork, so next weekend I have to start all over again. Yeah, it's always, you always have a little surprise there, but it's good fun. It's good fun. You're also learning on the way. I can only recommend that if you're confident enough. If you want to have the easy way, then I would recommend a kit from MK Sportscast, for example, or even Caterham, where you basically just strip it on a car and put it together. So that picture, for example, was one of the bushes which I did for the panel rod on my lathe. Yeah, you can buy them, but again, I needed them. I didn't want to order them on eBay. I have lots of raw material, so and I really enjoy do some lathe work, milling work on my own, and that's when I just did the bushes. Doesn't take too long, anyway. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
when I tapped it out. When I tapped the bush out, it's not hard to do. Yeah.
and you're using which engine do you have set up in yours?
So I use a 1600 crossflow with a so-called Ford Type 3 gearbox and Köln rear axle.
Okay. So we all have different wiring problems, and I think maybe we'll just see if Patrick has any advice about using a stock loom versus trying to make your own or trying to source one. Because I have Honda and Martin has Mazda, and you've got carburetors, Mike. So
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
considerably fewer wires. Patrick, do you have any thoughts as people try to plan what they might use?
Don't cheap out on the loom. It's the reason why probably I would say about 80% of Robin Hoods come onto the market. Guys have cheaped out in the wiring, and every time they go out, it breaks down. Eventually, they get fed up of it, gets shoved in the garage, and then sometime later, after the wife has shouted at the guy enough times, he sells it. And then I get people sending me pictures of, well, send me a picture of what the hell is that? Is like the thing goes, but it breaks down every other time. So for about $550, we can do a base loom, and that's open ends. Then what I do is via Skype, or we've done it via Skype, we're WhatsApp, is I give the guy support, and he's got a color list. Basically looks at the color of wire. Most of the wires are marked, and he basically crimps it into the various equipment. Anything difficult, I give them some support. That's on a basic loom for like a Robin Hood. You can get away with less wires on a Robin Hood. When we start coming up to Miata Mazda stuff, unfortunately, Mazda is all switched neutral. So instead of having four relays, we're now starting 8 relays. Then we're also having to integrate stuff like the speedo and the ECU. However, we've kind of got a design that's working now. It's getting better, and it's more streamlined. I've been working on exosets for some time. The development work is extremely difficult in time. It's the problem is everybody wants to put in another set of gauges, or we try to start with a stock gauge and then work away from that. So it takes a bit more, but I'm trying to keep the price down to a decent cost for the budget sort of stuff. But further on, people are wanting extras put in, like the FIA switch and stuff like that. And that all comes at a cost for not only a lot of the wiring will be 6 mil or 3 mil, and then we've got crimps and all the rest of it. So you can see my FIA switch there. So there's basically that. If we put the switch that's on the right-hand side there, that basically breaks. That breaks your main battery to car loom. But to prevent feedback from things like from the alternator, what we tend to do is we tend to put a cutout circuit, and at the same time when we do that, it grounds the alternator so that we don't get running on. That then cuts, say, fuel and ignition, and then the car is in a safe position to be obviously recovered should something unlucky happen. It's important that's wired correctly. Otherwise, what will happen is the fuel, it'll keep on running on, and the fuel pump will keep on coming in, and the ignition only uses a few amps of power to basically run. And it's well, if you get a fire, then you've got a problem. And that's happened a few times where, especially now here in the UK, they're running this nonsense fuel with the ethanol in it. It's just, especially in the older cars, the actual rubber is porous and it splits and stuff like that. So it's not just the wiring, it's actually the fuel system as well that's running very close to the wiring. That it's a safety thing, and basically you're strapped into this car, and if you are scrimping out on the one thing and using cheap pipe off eBay, people don't kind of get it that this is serious. It's a serious matter. So we haven't had anybody hurt yet, but we don't like to have that, because the first thing the papers will do is jump on and go, this is a nasty thing. So if you want a loom, you tell me what engine you have, and you basically, I will, and what ECU you're going to be using, what switch gear you're going to be using, and what gauges we're going to be using. And then basically I've got the data points for most of the gauges. I won't say everyone, but there's always somebody that comes along with a whole new set of gauges or something that we haven't seen before. And quite often then I just say, right, just send me your gauges, send me the switches, and I make up a loom with all of the difficult bits to do. So all of the magic behind the dashboard, so that all you've then got to do is do the front loom, which will be to the lighting. So we've got high beam, low beam, we've got side lights and indicators. We've got horn, we've got the usually the radiator, electric radiator fan, and a water washer if people are running with windscreens. So that's easy enough. The rear, we have we have indicators both sides. We have a fog light, we have a brake light, reverse light, and then we've got the fuel pump and the fuel sender. So it's not hard for somebody to do that if they are not into wiring. So the really critical stuff is in the middle at the front, and we make sure we've got a central earth and stuff like that. Everything's labeled, and we have basically we've gone from 100 questions down to the odd 5 or 10 questions from anybody. And I've done quite a lot of remote things, where the guy's actually the hands with a mechanic at one end, and because I sent him the right tools, he was able just to follow my instructions. I said, right, show me that wire, right, that goes to that, and that was done, and it works very well. We've got the technology. let's do it.
So let me just ask a devil's advocate question. If I want to do all my own wiring, would you suggest buying crimp tools, pins, all these connectors, and investing in fittings and things to line that up, or is the cost of the tools and the associated, accessories going to end up in the let's I'll speak in pounds because maybe in this 7 to 1,000 pound cost range, because I know that some of those crimp pliers, I watch all those Haltech videos and they're like, oh yeah, and these are just $500 for the pliers. So I don't know, like that's a hard sell. If the thing says low cost on the tin, it should not cost, as much as my engine to buy one pair of pliers.
Yeah. Well,
These
to put it there's this famous board that you get from CBS, and it's got yellow and blue connectors on it, and it's got relays and a couple of things, and they say 110 pounds, and then everyone says, oh, but then you just go and buy wires and you run it off this thing. Well, I've had a few of these where the guys got halfway, and the guys spent 450 on wire and bits and pieces and crimps and all this sort of stuff. And if you're buying them, say 5 crimps at a time, you're paying, it's like going into a big box store, buying from the B&Q or at Home Depot or whatever. We've got Builders Warehouse or one of these places. You get 10 crimps, but you're paying well over the price. The other thing is the stuff that they will be buying is of questionable quality. Often Chinese supported sort of stuff. By the time you've paid all the retail prices per meter per wire, and I'm going to tell you that there's 350 meters of wire in a little low cost. And I'm going to say how we worked that out. Well, basically, 100 meters of our wire weighs 1 kilogram. And I know when I'm starting to weigh these things, before I've even basically trimmed it and started to crimp it and put it through the machine and do all that sort of stuff, we're about 3.5 kilograms already. So there's, say, 320, because we've got a bit of tape on there and stuff like that. By the time you've costed out that in the retail price of so much per meter, you're starting to run in the thing. The other problem is mistakes cost money, and you pay a bit for doing it through my style. You're paying a bit for the professionality of it. We get the right wire size. We have the right quality of crimps. We're using Italian crimps. I've heard people wiring Chinese wire, and it's all very fine. Yes, it's all very fine until you get a small short on it and all the plastic falls off. Whereas I'm using British cable, which is highly regarded. It's traceable. So if there is any problems, we're back to the manufacturer straight. We're not dealing with Mr. Wong on Ali. The biggest problem with wiring is they say, oh, it's only 12 volts. It's not the 12 volts, it's the current that this stuff can carry. A car battery, just for things, about 1.2, 1.3 kilowatts of fault energy. So when it goes wrong big style. And the other thing is that my cable's not made of PLA like BMW or Tesla. It's the proper hard cased cable. And yes, we do know they also like eating fiber optics. And I didn't like standing on very fast main roads at midnight with cars speeding past you at 70 miles an hour. So, yes, we know about mice eating things. This eco cable, great idea, yes, but the mice can cause a lot of damage. Audis have got it, a lot of the new VWs as well. And it's its basic is PLA based. It's made of cornstarch. We commonly use it in 3D printing. So yes, there's the quality. I've got Italian. I use Italian crimps, so they're made of proper brass. They're brass all the way through, and they're crimped with a proper crimping press, which was calibrated. It cost, well, the machine was $3,000. So when these, because these connections are all outdoors, what should we say, and the UK has very damp weather. It's very critical, because once it gets a bit of water or moisture into the wiring, into the connections, then all sorts of weird things start to happen. And it's not nice breaking down when you're in your fancy car at the traffic lights and everybody's looking at you and you're spluttering and can't start the thing and you have to push it away. It's just better just to drive away fine. So, having been in Scotland a long time, getting wet wiring is something. So, we do take care in making the connections up so that they are going to stay. Quite often, I have suggested to use a certain spray. It's an electrical spray, and basically, it's not oil based. It's more, we use it in the boat, and this spray seals all the connections, and it keeps everything good.
Yeah, but that's it's a lot of information. It's a lot to digest. But I think at this point, the moral of the story is, unless you're a pro, use a pro for some stuff that's really critical, like mission critical parts. If you're willing to take a chance on it, you're welcome to. But sometimes it's easier to just say, for this part of the build, I'm going to go ahead and spend money. I know, Martin, how long did you run have you run your factory loom? Did you end up shortening it after a time?
I did shorten it after about a year. I plucked up the courage to tackle that. So it was basically one wire at a time, taking out, if I remember rightly, it was about, most of the wires, I took maybe 3 to 4 feet out. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it fairly added up. I think it was about 40 pounds worth of weight that was removed. But I did, what I used was non-insulated, those kind of heavy duty crimps. They're not the thin, they feel like they've got some substance to them. So non-insulated, crimped them up, and then put some insulation, heat shrink insulation over them. But yeah, I just did one wire at a time just to be sure that everything was working, and then it fired right back up.
Yep.
And how much time did that take?
I dare not think, but I was really, I mean, I didn't have the budget at the time. And you know, the total car cost was about 5,500. I round up to say it was definitely under 6,000, with all the bits and pieces that had to be purchased. But yeah, I would have loved to have had the luxury of a professional loom. Would have taken a lot of risk out of it. It would have been obviously a lot easier.
Yeah, and tangentially, we can maybe talk about timeline for a little bit. So, Mike, if you would jump in and talk, because you have put other things on the road and on the track. You want to talk a little bit about timeline, what you got planned and what you succeeded or not succeeded in doing?
It's not my first car, not my first project. Years ago, I bought a Formula V chassis, started a project, and then ending up selling that and buying someone else's project. which is that which you can see on the background. I was racing it in 2020 in the UK Championship. It retired then. Around, I would say, a year later, I want to change a category. I bought a so-called Race Kids Falcon for the 750 Formula 750 in the 750 Motor Club. Unfortunately, personal circumstances forced me to sell that project on. To my knowledge, the car is still under build, should be completed for next year in the championship. Yeah, and then I bought my Locost chassis, and the idea in the beginning was just doing hill climbing, but then I thought, okay, I need another car to trail it to the event, etc., etc. And then I thought, do you know what? Just get it road registered and go in one of the road going classes. Also, we have once a year, not far away, a hill climb. Well, if you can call it hill climb, but kind of show event / hill climb for all sorts of cars. The Share Hill in Surrey, which is getting every single year bigger. That's a really nice event for those people which are nearby. One thing I want to ask Patrick, actually, your wiring looms, are they ready for the IVA test?
Yes, they are. We've been the actual only difference really with the IVA is the fog light. The rules are that you switch the fog light on when the headlight. You can only switch the fog light on when the headlight's on. However, when you switch the headlights off, the fog light has to go off, and if you switch the headlights back on, the fog light doesn't come back on. So I build a latching circuit into the loom, so that's already there. You don't have to worry about that. I deal with the hazard warning circuits. There's a few ways you can do it. You can either do it on normally it was the Ford Sierra. I think they called that the Merca in North America. The old bathtub. They had that was fitted into the actual stalks itself. You can use a commercial switch, which has 7 connections, or I can do another way with the other bits and pieces with a short side, and that would do it no bother. It's basically you're getting the loom. All the relays are all in fitted. The indicators in fitted. All your fuses, that's all in, done, sized up. And then you just basically, that goes into the dashboard. We then come off with a block, and you've got an open loom for your gauges. And we then have the cables, the individual groups of cables labeled up. Each one's color coded. It's the same wire that leaves the dashboard that goes all the way to the rear or the front quarter or whatever. So there's no changing colors and all that sort of stuff. Most of my looms go out in Ford DIN colors. So anybody who's worked on a Ford, they'll know that the black white or the black green, that's indicators. And we basically go for that. I'm just looking here. We supplied the loom for the Locost 001. Yes. That was an interesting one. That had no wiring in it. There was a little story about that one. The deal was with Haynes that Mr. Champion to drive it to Paris. And it had enough ignition wiring in it to do what it needed to do. And a little bit of lighting and stuff, and off they went. So I got all the gauges and stuff. Most of them had never been connected up, but they were period gauges. And we kind of worked our way through everything. and we wired that up, and that was a really successful one. It went down to it's Bristol way. It's Bristol. It's near my sister-in-law's place, into England, and the gentleman basically dropped it in, and through a bit of Skype and every question every now and again, he was able to get it connected up into the car and made the car run. And I was guilty of not going down and helping, because it's difficult when you're only one person. It's difficult to try and get time off to go and do these remote trips.
Mm-hmm.
But so all the clever stuff's done, and then we just basically support. So that's got value in its own. The other thing is that by doing all the wiring, I actually take a lot off of the gentleman who may be very good, excellent working on cars, great mechanic, can do all of the mechanical stuff. Why try to scrimp on something you don't know? Just get an expert. We drop the loom on you. If you can read and you can you actually just read the labels, it's easy to do. It saves you all the headaches, and you don't end up with 150 extra things that you didn't need. Because it's very hard to get a bill of quantities if you don't know the job. And you're going to make all the mistakes that were made in the first place when the looms were basically invented with Alan Boxall.
Patrick,
Yeah, I
how
think
long is the delivery time for your wiring looms?
At the moment, I'm about 5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But normally I'm about 2 weeks. 2 weeks, 10 days. It's just we've had some very very complex looms come in. I'm busy wiring a Coven at the moment, which is a Porsche. It's got a Subaru engine and a lot of Porsche type stuff in it. And what we've done is we've been developing a loom that is more custom to that particular car. Mm-hmm. The reason being is we are planning to go out to the Turks Chaos.
Oh, so close. All right, so we're gonna move on just for a moment until Patrick reappears. I think that the three of us that are left here in the picture can all agree that time is precious, and influencing the timeline of your build by removing months of fiddling with wiring could be advantageous. And for everyone who's thinking of starting or currently working on a project, that's a thing that you're going to have to decide on your own what your time is worth. I know that Patrick said he's currently on a 5-week wait for looms, and it's taken me 5 weeks just to cut one tube that's only 10 inches long and hold it up about 60 times. So I'm not a fast mover because I have analysis paralysis, which we may also all have, depending on what your normal job is. If perfection is required in your daily work, or as near as can be, sometimes doing this can be a daunting task. So we might not do too much about road legality, but it is possible, and it is difficult in some places than it is in others. I know that Martin, we talked earlier about the process that you went through in California, and if you would mind just like spitting out the abridged version of that, it could help some people who are probably trying to do it here in the States. That'd be really handy to know. I know there's certain forms, and you already know all the numbers, so have at it.
Yeah, so I'm based in California, and there's a process for building a specially constructed vehicle, and basically your aim is to make it smog exempt. And the first step is securing an SB 100 certificate for that specially constructed vehicle, and then remember the steps correctly. Once you've filed the paperwork to say how you built the car, what parts you used, and you've paid the tax on that. That's the key point, paying the tax. And then you go to the California Highway Patrol. They check your car over to make sure the VIN on the engine and transmission or match the paperwork that you have. And then a brake and lamp inspection, and then a trip to the BAR, which is Bureau of Automotive Repair, I think. Those are the guys that train the smog technician. So it's a smog referee that you're going to, usually at a local college, and they will connect the dots with the paperwork that's filed in the DMV system and the paperwork that you have in hand. And they'll give you a sticker that says it's smog exempt. And the way that they smog exempt it is to give it a year of manufacture that's past dated. So mine is listed as a 1964 Lotus 7 replica. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. I see a question. Yeah, I think I mentioned it already. The total project cost was somewhere between $5,500 and $6,000, including, buying seats, fuel tank, radiator. Having paid $1,800 for the donor Miata, I sold the parts that I didn't need for about $1,500. So it was basically $300 for engine, transmission, wheels, some old tires. That kind of thing. And the wiring loom, of course, I took that road because I didn't have the funds to go and have someone do that for me. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. So, and then there are a wide variety of requirements in different locations. So we know that the IVA process is very strict, but I believe the way it works is you only do it once. So, Mike, you may be in luck once you get it passed with all of your properly radiused bolt covers, and certain attachment points must be no more than a hand's width from this. And if you stand on one foot and wink the right way, you might get past. But then you can kind of do whatever you want. The way I understand it here in Tennessee is I just have to show receipts for all the parts. It may be just major parts. And then I take that to some DMV place, and then Tennessee Highway Patrolman comes to view the car. And I know that somebody has done it in East Tennessee, and I know that the Stillwells are building an MK, so that might be another way we can talk about that. But theirs will be registered as an MK, and then once the Highway Patrol guy signs off that I think you have lights and it starts and stops, then it's kind of okay. And you pick the year, just like Martin, just like you did. The ones that have been successfully registered here, I believe, have all been done as early 60s. I think the cutoff year here is 72 or 75 for it. Then you could choose historic vehicle, or it's for sure exempt from everything. And, seat belts are optional and all that stuff. I will have seat belts. I'm not trying to get yelled at. Or accidentally fly anywhere. So that's not going to be an issue for me. Yeah, I think the budget thing is also important. So depending on what you want to do and how fancy you want to get, you can spend as much or almost as little as you would like. I know the book says, build your own car and race it for 250 pounds, but we know we're not just going to be like hacking away at a bed frame anymore. Most people are building things that are substantially more engineered of sorts than the original books looked and probably felt. So I paid too much for my frame. Thank you, John. IVA, one-time pass, once passed, you can do whatever you want. That's very handy to know. And here we don't even have safety inspections, so that's another whole thing. In Tennessee, pretty much we don't. There may be a couple of counties that still have it, but it's mostly for like watershed issues, the way I understand it. I paid too much for my frame. If I had an option to do it again, I would have waited another year and gone and gotten this other more roller project that I saw a few weeks ago, either in Kentucky or Ohio. And now I didn't pay too much for my engine. I think I paid $700 or $800 for my engine, and I'm using an S2000 transmission, which can become prohibitively expensive now. People really want them, and they're somehow managing to break them sometimes. But I got mine for what I feel is a reasonable price, and my front and rear subframes I also got for what I feel is a reasonable price. So all in, probably I'm just in parts right now, almost at that $6,000 part mark. But I think the lowest MK frame I think right now is like 85 or 89.95. So am I getting close to that? Maybe, and that should be probably a consideration if you want to pick somebody else's project. I don't think most people have bought an MK or a GBS or certainly not very many partially built Caterhams I've ever seen come up, but people get started and then they get frustrated or they get stuck on something, and after 2 or 3 years of it sitting, then they say, all right, it's time to go. I don't think that anybody should consider it a waste of money if you tried and didn't succeed. But also, if you're here, maybe you just need a little support, or you need a check-in, and we'll help you cut one more tube every week or 2 weeks. Or you can go watch my YouTube channel where I drop parts inside the bottom of the engine on day one and have to flip things over to get them out. Also on starting, so let's talk about some things that you're gonna need, or you can choose whether you need them or not. Obviously, Martin, you did your build table with sawhorses and a sheet and carpet to hold it still. Mike, do you have a build table?
So no, I don't. I didn't have a build table because the main chassis was already built. What we did, we supported everything when we did the rear and the lower part first. At this time, the chassis was going on the ramp. If you see the picture, that was still where I was working at my workplace. So we started my workplace, and then later on we put it back in my garage. Because in my workplace, I thought I get something done, but I almost never got anything done. And then at least in my garage, I got my Sundays where I can crack on with the work. I would say a build table, if you start from scratch, is important. If you buy already chassis, which is mainly built like mine, then I would say no. However, you might need, not might need, you need to have some jigs for the suspension brackets. That helps. So soon I have to do mine as well for the front. Again, learning curve. I don't know how accurate the book is. I have to say sometimes the book leaves still room for interpretation. And for example, from that what I've heard, that the camber on the Ron Champion book is not correct for the IVA because the steering wheel has to go back when you drive it in a corner. That's all things I will see now what's going on. And then obviously once I know, I can advise further here also on the channels to help someone out which needs some help. So guys, I think lots of us have a channel as well. I got my own channel. If you got any questions, if you need anything, more happy to help.
Yeah, Martin dealt with it, and the groups are a great source of information. Thank you, guys, for posting it in the background. Martin is dealing with some of that. He's going to be moving some front suspension points and had a rear control arm pickup hatefully remove itself. Possibly, a braking force thing, and if some of it is trial and error, at least it didn't happen catastrophically or at a really important time for it to be working. Also, tools. I love tools. I have many copies of many tools that maybe I should or should not have, but having 2 half-inch breaker bars sure does come in handy sometimes. You do not have to buy the professional version of every tool that you're going to use. And if you go, I don't know what I found the place that's the British version of Harbor Freight. It's a bargain something. Somebody can chime in.
Machine Mart.
Machine Mart. All right. I knew we looked it up a couple of weeks ago. I have a lot of tools from Harbor Freight, and you can see me use them, and I've never broken one. Also, I try to be really careful with my tools, and I don't have to work at the pace of a professional shop. So I'm not going to be, destroying things. And depending on the state of build that you get into, you may have a frame that was built and some parts were built on there, and then they have since rusted and seized. Well, you have two options. You can buy all the things to get them unseized, or you can cut them off. So I've done some cutting off of things, and there's some tubes that I have to move. Oh yeah, in Canadian, your version is Princess Auto. I love that place. Every time I go to Newfoundland to my wife's parents, I'm always like, let's go to Princess Auto and just walk around and smell the rubber. It's like going into a shoe shop for the first time when you're a little kid. So I have a fair number of tools. I have a mini lathe that's broken. I have a mini mill that functions, but I try to put full size tooling on it. It doesn't work. Don't try that. You can do everything with a hacksaw. I think Martin said when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, he's like, I was trying to do it on the cheap, but I had to buy another blade. And so he did a lot of his by hand, and sometimes it feels just really nice to do things by hand with hand tools. It makes the process a little easier to get into. I think sometimes when you're like, oh, I really want to do this and I just want to make it perfect, and you can make really nice, accurate cuts with hand tools, and then you can take them over to the belt sander, right? Belt sander, probably handy. Depending on your welding skills, you probably don't have to buy an $8,000 welder, because unless you're going to take it on the road and build out $100,000 welding truck, don't spend that money. I bought an Alpha TIG. Yes Welder actually is apparently very well rated. Lots of people on Amazon like it. I think Scott's Rods, Dave bought one of those, or a friend of his sent one, and he did great with that. You could probably do all of this with a single hacksaw and flux core. Not that would pass anybody's, it's not going to space nuclear level welding inspectors, but it's held together plenty of buildings, so it might hold together your car. All right. So also, how much space do you have? This is yeah, exactly. Somebody's reading my mind. So I have a large garage that's full of other things that I should not have kept for all these years, but I'm really doing all this in a single bay, maybe basically like 1.5 bays of the garage. So maybe show of hands, or we can just chime in. How much space did you use, or are you using? Because I know that a lot of people only have one garage space. Mike, how much room you got?
Yeah, so I got also double garage. However, I shared with my friend. He got his other Formula V at the moment. He also wants to do another project, so it's basically just a single garage space. In one corner, I got my lathe. Again, coming back to the tools, I'm a tool fetishist, but I don't need to have lathe milling machine, etc., etc. I would say, yeah, a MIG welder, yes, handy. Angle grinder, yes. A pillar drill, a good quality pillar drill, I would say, is helpful. And then, yeah, lots of normal hand tools. Engine crane is good if you want to keep your back. If you can rent it, is even better, because you just need it several times. If you got a place to rent it, perfect. Yeah, and apart from what I said, single garage, yeah, it's cramped. It's nice to have a double garage, but also the bigger the space you have, the more tools you have probably, or end up with tools. Yeah, probably Dave, you know how it works.
Yeah, and kind of while we're on that, have you collected parts months or years before you are going to use them? For me,
Yeah,
definitely yes. Like,
yeah,
I've got cycle
definitely.
wings fenders that I found. Somebody was selling them in England. I said, I want carbon fenders, and I bought them. It's going to be 2 years maybe until I'm even ready to fit them. I haven't made the brackets. I haven't even finished putting the front subframe for the suspension in. So I don't have piles of parts, I think, is kind of normal. And especially like if you watch those guys, Tools and Track, once you get a shelf, you can just start putting things on it. And then sometimes you get a little inspiration when you go and look at it. And you're like, oh, today I'm going to just put this on top of the wheel and just let it sit there and pretend that it's real. I have a single Caterham fender that I got from a friend that was damaged. Damaged for him is like perfect for me. You can't even see the rock chip. But for fit up, it's going to be great. Hopefully, I'll find some other things at that point. And I know we all have a hilarious collection of parts. All right, skills that you're going to need. I mean, basic measurement tools. I would buy as many clamps and measuring tools as you can handle because you're never going to have enough clamps to put things in place. Martin, did you make all of your? I know you built your frame from scratch, but did you make those jigs or print those the little blocks when you screwed things down?
Yeah, I just had some scrap lying around, and yeah, I found the blocks really just help for alignment purposes until everything's tack welded up, but they didn't really come into play for the full final welds. But I took my time to go, one weld on the rear left corner. Next weld is a distance away. I just randomly distanced the welding so that it wasn't all pulling on one side, because the welds do shorten the tubes.
Yeah, I think finding good sources of reliable information, especially since everything's on YouTube, but YouTube is also open to everything. Being discerning in your choice of example is quite important. Like I watch a guy, Jody Collier, who runs Welding Tips and Tricks, and 90% of what I understand about welding is probably from watching hundreds of hours of him just doing it. But my job involves a lot of copying things, both visually and with time, because I'm a musician. So for me, the timing is not the problem. It's not being afraid to, put enough amperage into there. Um, but that's only on the welding side. And if you've got a frame that's already made and you really don't have to do a lot of welding on it, good for you. Because now then you can spend time worrying about things like, am I going to rivet or bond my floor or both? And how am I going to hang my wiring inside? I don't know, Patrick, if you want to speak about that for just a moment, like securing wiring and brake lines and things like that. You said earlier that when people have fuel lines above wiring, you've run into problems with that. If you want to speak about that for a minute.
Yeah, we generally have clashes where we're running along the tunnel. It gets pretty tight in there, and the IVA are also a bit fussy about how this stuff, the spacing that the actual three services go through there, that they don't really like them all tied together, but then they want them, I think it's about 12 inches minimum. So you haven't got the like washing lines running along the tunnel. You've also got to watch, and you've got a prop shaft that's turning at 6,000 revs or whatever the final drive is. So there's that to think about as well. There's also pinch points, especially if you've got a live diff. You can have it might seem fine in the workshop when you're sitting and you jump on it and it moves a little bit, but when you're actually in the car, some of these suspensions parts move a lot more than you would expect. And if the wiring at the top of the rear tunnel is not in the correct place, that can get pinched. There's other bind points as well where there's hot things like the exhaust and stuff like that, and you've got to think out the wiring that it's not got to go on the hot side of the engine, more on the cold side. But even the cold side of the engine's got issues, so you've got to watch out for fuel spillage and stuff like that. I would always urge people rather sit down. Let's go through it. Do me a little drawing of what you've got. And one of the things that comes to mind that always gets me is people stick the brake switch. They stick it facing upwards. Well, going to learn about that one. Customer absolutely going nuts on me of there's something wrong with the wiring and he's going to have to replace all the wiring and stuff, that his brake lights don't work because his friend was following him. And well, go and have a look at the what's the name? Go and have a look at the brake switch. Where is it? Oh, it's in the rear. Oh, okay. And what way is it facing? Well, it's facing normal way. Well, no, it should be upside down because air goes to the top. So
I would have messed that up.
It's a simple thing like that, and I know about that mistake because guess what? I made that mistake on a car. Well, I bought an early MK de Dion chassis, and that sort of stuff was already done in the chassis. And we didn't think anything of it. We've got one thing. We're going to finish this car. And it was like, hang on a second, we were doing local testing. The thing hadn't even seen a testing station yet, and it had done like 6,000 miles. So, well, you live in the countryside, we've got plenty of private roads. So there was a friend of mine that he used to follow behind in case we would break down, and he would say, those brake lights, I hardly ever think. And was like, but I've been standing on them. And we go back to the workshop and you stand on the thing. Yes, the brake lights are working. And it turned out this thing's facing the wrong way. The bubble had trapped itself inside, and it was only when you really hammered on the brakes, and because it was on the rear, the front on the Sierra, the front brakes come on first and then the rear. So the bias is towards the front, because that's obviously the one that all the weight. So we changed it. You know what? Every time we put on the brake, just touch it, brake lights come on. So yeah, it's little tips like that do make a difference.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight because I would definitely have thought, oh, it's a sensor, it should be accessible, and then I would have definitely messed that up. So I think we have spent yet another hour gathering information and hopefully giving information that is useful to everybody that's here and everybody that's watching it out in cyberspace. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up, if that's okay with everybody. Mike, Martin, and Patrick, thank you. And of course, in the background, Jim and John for managing all the things going up and down. Thank you for joining us. And we're going to wrap this up. I think we've still got enough stuff on our list that we could probably do another one of these. And if you have any specific questions or comments whenever this goes up on YouTube, please don't hesitate to ask. And that way, you can be part of the guided discussion. And if you want to join in on another one of these webinars that we do periodically, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us at 7spot, either on Facebook or 7spot Media. You can find us somewhere on the internet. So we'll all stay online to get our videos uploaded so that this can be edited down. And we will see you on 7spot.